In a dimly lit salon on Rue Saint-Germain in Paris, the air is thick with the scent of dried roses and aged parchment. A woman with a cool countenance and eyes of profound depth strokes a massive ring, whispered to have come from an ancient Eastern kingdom. She is Marie Anne Lenormand, revered and feared by her contemporaries as the Sibyl of Paris or the Black Madonna. Tonight, by the rhythmic flicker of the hearth, let us step into the true odyssey of her life. She once told a yet-to-be famous Napoleon, "You shall possess supreme glory, but in the end, you will perish on a lonely island." At the time, Napoleon offered only a disdainful smirk, dismissing it as the absurd ramblings of a charlatan seeking silver. Yet 30 years later, as the Atlantic gale swept across the crags of St. Helena, that prophecy became the most desolate echo of his final moments. The life of Marie Anne Lenormand was like a mirror reflecting the rise and fall of the First French Empire. She saw through the secrets of countless elites, yet never once sought to alter her own conclusion. She was a footnote to history, and the most silent messenger of fate. When Marie Anne Lenormand first pushed open the heavy gates of Paris, she was but a provincial girl still trailing the scent of the earth. She was not a woman of conventional sweetness. Rather, her face possessed a solemnity and stillness that transcended her years. During her time in the convent, the young Marie caused a panic by accurately predicting the resignation of the Mother Superior. The nuns looked at her with a gaze mixed with pity, but even more so with an unnameable dread. In an era of such cataclysmic upheaval, foresight was not a gift, but a leaden curse. She began reading palms in the back alleys of Paris, using the ancient cards known as Etila to deduce fortune and woe. She was never in a rush, always patiently listening to the ragged breathing of the desperate, the ambitious, and the fugitive. She discovered that every person's destiny was inscribed within their own anxiety and greed. The cards merely gave those emotions a name. She began to meticulously collect exotic spices, arranging her dwelling into a space that felt like a detached dimension. Paris then stood on the precipice of the revolution, with the shadow of the guillotine looming over every head. Yet, in those shadows, Marie Anne Lenormand perceived an unusual blood-tinted radiance. Her reputation, much like a potent perfume, diffused quietly through the damp Parisian air until it reached the ears of the most exalted personages. The turning point of fate occurred on an utterly ordinary afternoon when two noblewomen pushed open her small door. One of them was Josephine de Beauharnais, the woman who would eventually drive all of France into a frenzy. At the time, Josephine had just lost her husband and was at the nadir of her life, facing the constant threat of arrest. Marie Anne Lenormand gazed at Josephine's palms, hands that were exquisitely delicate yet etched with a multitude of fine, fractured lines. After a long silence, she whispered, "You shall soon encounter a short officer. He will lead you to the pinnacle of power." She went as far as to precisely describe that Josephine would wear a crown encrusted with diamonds, becoming the most exalted woman in all of Europe. Josephine laughed behind her hand, yet as she departed that perfume-laden room, her spine straightened involuntarily. Not long after, Josephine indeed met that ambitious young man, Napoleon Bonaparte. Lenormand's name began to circulate through the high society of Paris like a forbidden whisper. She was no longer a street fortune-teller, she had become a prophet capable of piercing the mists of history, a therapist for the souls of the powerful. She never flattered, even when facing the future empress, her tone remained as cold as a shard of millennial ice. This restraint and precision inspired a near-religious fervor among those seeking an anchor amidst the turbulence. Napoleon's attitude toward Marie Anne Lenormand was complex, a brand of awe mixed with fear and jealousy. As a rational conqueror, he permitted no force in the world to stand above his will. Yet, every one of Lenormand's prophecies was like a precision nail, driven deep into the axle of his unstoppable chariot. When Napoleon decided to divorce Josephine, Lenormand sternly warned him that it would be the eclipse of his fortune. She told the invincible man that Josephine was his lucky star. Once cast aside, the tricolor of France would no longer flutter over distant lands. Enraged, Napoleon ordered this rambling woman to be thrown into prison. However, iron bars could not obstruct Lenormand's vision. In her damp, cold cell, she continued her calculations with the tattered cards she had left. Jailers would sneak into her cell in the dead of night, hoping she might offer them guidance. Lenormand merely looked at the faint moonlight outside the window with equanimity, as if the prison itself were but a scene in the grand theater of fate. She knew that Napoleon would eventually return to her, or rather he would eventually be consumed by the reality she had already foreseen. In that turbulent era, the prison ironically became the quietest place in Paris, and the one closest to the truth. And she was the prisoner who possessed the truth yet had no intention of escaping. Lenormand's twilight years were spent in a solitude that was exceedingly dignified yet detached. She had accumulated vast wealth, enough to lead a life of luxury in the most opulent quarters of Paris. Yet, she maintained her simple habits, spending lavishly only on books and rare divinatory tools. Her home was adorned with ancient maps gathered from all corners of the globe, her method of deciphering the laws of the world. Many sought to uncover her secrets, believing she hid mechanisms within her cards or added hallucinogens to her perfumes. But in truth, she had simply learned to observe sooner than others, to observe the direction of the wind and the ripples within the human heart. She once said that destiny is not a fixed point, but a shimmering line woven from countless choices. She had witnessed too much rise and fall, and seen too many faces of despair as people lost everything an instant after gaining it. Toward the end, she ceased predicting specific events and began to speak of the soul's repose and inner peace. In her salon, young poets and fallen politicians sat side by side, listening to her recount the imperial sagas that had long since vanished with the wind. Her voice grew raspier, yet it also grew more powerful, like the tolling of a bell in the deep mountains. This power did not stem from authority, but from the fact that she already knew the ending. When the summer of 1843 descended upon Paris, Marie and Lenormand knew that her own time was drawing to a close. She settled her estate with composure, leaving behind only a single deck of cards so worn that their patterns were indistinguishable. She displayed no fear of death, for in her prophecies, death was but the beginning of a long journey. That night, a rare thunderstorm struck Paris. The rain washed the ancient streets and buried the dust of the empire. In her bedroom, she lit the last stick of a specially made aloes wood, which she had traded from a traveler in her youth. As the smoke curled upward, she seemed to see once more the hem of Empress Josephine's gown and the melancholic eyes of Napoleon. Her funeral was grand. Countless citizens took to the streets spontaneously to bid farewell to the Black Madonna. People laid cards and flowers at her gravestone, as if a divine revelation capable of rewriting one's life still remained hidden there. She took the secrets of an era with her, yet left behind a legend that can never be fully decoded. Even today, 200 years later, when people find Lenormand oracle cards at Parisian flea markets, they still feel that shiver of fate. Her existence was itself a cold meditation on that turbulent era, a gaze that stood detached from the reaches of power. The life of Marie and Lenormand thus concluded slowly amidst symbols and intuition. We are often accustomed to worshipping those who stand at the fore, waving banners, while easily overlooking the sages who observe the stars from behind the scenes. She was never the master of power. She was merely an exquisitely sensitive stethoscope that heard the irregular beating of the era's heart. She tells us that no matter how treacherous or unpredictable destiny may be, inner certainty is the hardest armor. Just as she did on those cold nights, sitting alone before the candlelight, searching for the rhythm of the universe through the sound of shuffling cards. You now might be in a state of confusion or anxiety, perhaps awaiting the arrival of an answer. But please believe that in every person's life, there is a prophecy of their own yet to be revealed. It lies not within the cards, nor beneath the stars, but within every one of your firm footsteps. Tonight's story ends here. I hope the stillness of this Parisian which brings you a touch of solace. The hearth has grown dim, the world outside is quiet, and it is time to lay down all conjectures and deductions. Good night, and may you find that long-held composure and peace within Lenormand's dream.